Howdy, Immortalium here, and today I'm going to be reviewing Gundam Wing. Now, before I start talking about Gundam Wing, there's a couple of things I need to tell you about. And let's open up with how the series did in Japan. Basically, around the time that Gundam Wing aired, which was around 1995, Gundam was being aired constantly throughout the year. Basically, you know, they would make a Gundam series, they would air for about 50 episodes, and then, you know, very next week there'd be a brand new Gundam series, and it went on and on. And they were doing okay, is the way to say it, in terms of ratings. They were getting okay ratings in the terms of Gunpla sales, you know, like the Gundam kits. They were doing okay, but they weren't too successful. Now, Gundam Wing was a little more successful than they were. It did a little better in ratings, it did a little better in Gunpla sales, but overall it was only like above average. Now, go over to America, where Toonami decided to air this, you know, on the block, and it did really well in ratings. It did exceptionally well. You know, it got great ratings, and you know, people absolutely loved it. They aired the movie on there, and it did really well as well. And Bandai were hoping to replicate its success, and they failed. Basically, they chose after this series to air the original Mobile Suit Gundam, and even kids could tell that, you know, there was a bit of an animation shift in terms of quality between Gundam Wing and the original Mobile Suit Gundam. So not the brightest choice on Bandai's part. Now, the other thing I want to point out is my own experience of Gundam. You know, how much of a Gundam nut am I? And that is, the answer is not much. You know, I'm no noob when it comes to Gundam. Basically, I've seen Gundam Seed, I've seen Gundam Destiny, I've reading, you know, Gundam Origin, and now I've seen this. So, you know, if you want to know how qualified I am, that's how qualified I am. So, Gundam Wing, let's start off with the story. So, how does it open up? Well, it opens up a little differently to normal. Basically, all those other series I mentioned open up pretty much exactly the same way. And Gundam Wing opens up differently, which, you know, I'm very happy about, because even though I've only come across it 3 times, already it was getting quite repetitious the way that, you know, Gundam series would start out. So basically, Gundam Wing opens up with an operation, Operation Meteor. Basically, the colonies, you know, the space colonies, send 5 Gundams to Earth in order to take on this organization called Oz. Now, Oz is a military faction, and in fact, they've been responsible for some trouble for the colonies, in particular an assassination. I won't go into any more details on that. And the Gundams want kind of revenge, that's the best way to put it. So they get to Earth, they start blowing stuff up, etc, etc. Now, at the same time, we are introduced to this girl called Relina. And Relina has just returned from the colonies with her father. She decides to travel home by herself. She passes by the beach and she encounters a boy on the beach, you know, unconscious. She goes down there, she gets him up, he runs away from her, escapes, and very next day, you know, she attends school, and there he is. And he actually threatens to kill her. And that's how the series opens up. It's a very promising start, as I've been saying, but over the course of this series does fall a bit flat in terms of storytelling. What do I mean by that? Let's start off with the positives. One positive I will say is that I really like that there's a certain theme in the series, and that is mobile dolls. Now, mobile dolls are basically mobile suits which are run, you know, through computers, so there's no people involved in them. And at first you kind of think it's a good thing. People aren't getting killed. But there is a very good point brought up, and that is the reason that many wars are stopped is because of the fact that, you know, people get killed, and, you know, the horrors of these actions are what cause people to, you know, stop the war, etc, etc. And once you remove that human factor out of it, war will just keep going on and on and on, and it'll cause irreparable damage to economy, to structures, to civilians, etc, etc. So that was a very fascinating idea, and I really liked it. Not as well developed as I would have liked, but it was a very fascinating idea. Now, besides that, I would argue that the middle bit of the series, in terms of story, meanders a little bit. You know, there isn't too much happening in the middle of the series. So I believe that they could have, you know, cut, you know, the middle maybe 15 episodes down into like 5 episodes easily, and it would have just felt a lot better pacing wise. And then the ending, I will say that the ending of the TV series I didn't like at all. Now with the movie, the sequel movie, Endless Waltz, the ending was a little better, not by much, but it was a little better. And actually that's kind of my main reason for recommending seeing the movie, because I wasn't that keen on the movie. It was a bit more of the same. And it didn't really deal with, you know, any great themes or ideas or anything. It's just kind of, you know, battle, etc, etc. So, really my only recommendation for the movie is, you know, the ending. And even then it's a bit of a stretch. Characters, let's discuss characters. So, our very lead character, Hiro Yui, which is the guy I was mentioned about being knocked out on a beach. I will say that he's an interesting lead character for Gundam in that he is very different to you know, the other Gundam leads that I've seen. Kira Yamato, Shin Asuka, Amuro Ray. Because of the fact that he's so aggressive, is I guess the best way to put it. That, and he really kind of pushes out any level of sympathy from himself. Now, of course, over the course of the series we see him regain some of that sympathy, but even by the end he's still a very cold character, which I found actually quite interesting. So, I kind of did like him as a character. Now, if we get to the other Gundam pilots, as I mentioned, there were 5 Gundams sent to Earth. We come across a, you know, host of other characters. Duo, Maxwell, who is kind of the butt of everyone's jokes. We come across Troa, who is, again, he's kind of like Hiro in that he is a bit cold. Now, he isn't on the same level as cold, but he is cold. And because of that, I found him kind of interesting as well. Not too keen on Duo. My least favourite Gundam pilot, Carter, or Carteru, or something, I don't know, I watched this in Japanese. He is the really kind of whiny, overly sympathetic, when I say overly sympathetic, I mean he has too much sympathy for everyone around him. And he believes that it's his fault for everything. And in fact, there was actually a character moment where someone very close to him died. And he swore revenge, and at that point I actually thought he was going to become a really interesting character, but it got resolved way too fast, that bit, and once it was resolved, they didn't bring it up for the rest of the series, despite how seemingly significant it is, so I was quite disappointed in that. And then we end off with Wu Fei, which he isn't that great a character. He doesn't get that much screen time, he doesn't get that much development. He is the least interesting of all the Gundam pilots, and as I said before, my least favourite is Carter or Carteru or whatever. So yeah, a bit problematic. Now, 2 other characters I want to point out. Relina. Now, Relina is the girl that came across Hiro on the beach, and she has a very significant role to play in this series. Basically, she has a certain bloodline in her, kind of an unknown bloodline, which makes her a very, very powerful character in terms of she's able to sway lots of people's opinions. What I will say is that I'm not a big fan of her, and actually I knew immediately, I believe it was the 2nd episode, Hiro had gone away. You know, he had gone off over the ocean or whatever, and she was standing, you know, by the beach or whatever, and she was shouting out, you know, please come back, Hiro, you have to kill me, or something like that. It's like, I was just thinking to myself, who in their right mind would say that? And beyond that, she becomes one of those characters who, she has a principle. I won't say what principle, because it's something to do with her bloodline, but she has a principle, and she won't break away from it for whatever reason, and I guess that's fine for some principles, but the one she has is a form of extremism, and she can tolerate kind of no divergence from that principle, so overall I just found her quite annoying for that. Now, I've been kind of negative about a lot of these characters from Gundam Wing. This is about to change. Basically, every Gundam series has a masked character. And, well, Gundam Destiny, I guess, technically had a masked character, but I don't really count him in the same vein as the other ones. Anyway, I will say that this series actually has my favourite masked character from Gundam, Zex Marquise. And the reason I like Zex so much is he has a kind of a duality about him. He basically has two identities, both of which actually blend together surprisingly well. He's also a very sympathetic character. You know, he has a duty in the military force, Oz to be more specific. But even so, he kind of realizes that a lot of the actions he's taking are not the best, and he could be doing better, etc., etc. And he has kind of that struggle, which eventually leads him into doing some kind of questionable acts, etc., etc. And I found him to be a much more engaging character than Raulo Crusade or Char. Now, with Raulo Crusade, I've seen, you know, the entire Gundam Seed, so, you know, he just kind of devolved into being one of those villains who shouted a lot. Char, I've only read the first 4 volumes of Gundam Origins, so I haven't seen the whole arc of Char, so maybe I'll end up liking Char more than Zex, but basically, at this point, I prefer Zex to Char. I think he has a bit more of a character arc, he's a lot more sympathetic, he's a lot more likable, etc., etc. Now, beyond that, the only other thing I'll say about characters is that I was not particularly impressed by any other female characters, or any female characters to be more specific in this. Basically, they felt like they were there purely so that, you know, they would be in love with someone, and they just came off as being quite weak in many regards, so I did find that quite annoying. Now, animation-wise, this was animated by Sunrise, as with all Gundam series, and the animation is okay. That's the best way that I can put it. It has its moments. Like, there's some really nice moments of animation. Like, I remember this scene very clearly where Troa has to kind of jump in front of someone, and like the background turns black, and you know, there's a kind of a pan out, and we see the other character, you know, the Gundam that he's in, kind of moving forward, and it's a really beautifully animated scene. So I was highly impressed with that. But then, the majority of the time, the animation is stiff, a bit choppy, and every so often the quality control goes off really badly. Like, in particular, episode 2, when we were introduced to Duo, his legs looked really bent, like, as in bent very unnaturally, and I thought for a moment maybe he had, like, metal prosthetics or something. You know, I was trying to figure out, okay, maybe it isn't a flaw in the animation, maybe it's actually, you know, part of his character, but no, it was just, he has normal legs, it's just they were drawn very badly, that's all. So, that was the worst moment for quality control. In the rest of the series, you know, characters lose a bit of detail every so often, their eyes kind of move off every so often a bit too weirdly, but in general, the animation is, you know, it's okay. I mean, it's nothing exceptional in general, but serves its purpose very well. And as of course, to be expected with the movie, Endless Waltz, a huge increase in animation quality. Now, when I say that, I mean in terms of the actual movement of people, the actual animation, whereas the frame rate of the TV series is clearly 8 frames, as in most anime. I would argue that the frame rate for the movie is probably 12 frames per second. It's a lot cleaner, there isn't as much reuse, etc., etc. Speaking of reuse, as with any other Gundam series, they do love to reuse the same footage over and over of, you know, various you know, mobile suits getting blown up, etc., etc. Art style-wise, I actually like the look of the series. The character designs are pretty nice, etc., etc. My problem is, you know, the quality control. The characters look a bit off, you know, every so often, you know, that really puts me off. But I actually like the character designs. I think they're a lot more loyal to the original kind of Gundam character designs than Seed was. So, that's what I will say that. Music-wise, as with most other Gundam series, this has a pretty epic soundtrack. My big flaw with it, though, is that I actually like the soundtrack for Gundam Seed and Gundam Seed Destiny more than this, but the soundtrack is actually really good in this series. You know, you won't be disappointed with the soundtrack. Now, the opening is pretty good, I would say. I would really like the opening. The ending, which was used for all 49 episodes of the series, I like the song, but it's Relena, showing off Relena, basically, and since I don't really like Relena, I found it quite tedious, that's the best way to put it. Voice acting. I chose to watch this in Japanese. I've learned that pretty much all the dubs for Gundam are pretty bad. And take away a lot from the series, so I watched this in Japanese. And pretty much all the Japanese performances are good, but they're not exceptional. Basically, in Gundam Seed and Gundam Seed Destiny, the actual voice acting is of a much higher caliber. There's a lot more emotion behind the characters, behind the voices, behind the characters, I should be saying. And that's not to say that Gundam Wing isn't is a bad voice acting thing. It isn't. It's got some very good performances, particularly from Zex, but there are those moments, where characters act a bit too, like their voice acting behind them is a bit too monotone, I will say. So it isn't a flawless performance from the Japanese cast, but I will say it's a good performance and very, very watchable. I guess that's my review for Gundam Wing. Overall, what did I think of it? It's an okay series. I definitely don't regret getting it and seeing it. Its significance on, anime fandom in America can't be underestimated, but I do prefer Gundam Seed. While I will actually say I will prefer this over Destiny, simply because of how unsatisfying Destiny was. And then overall I prefer Gundam Origin. So Gundam Wing, I would say of all the Gundams I've seen, third favourite, or second least favourite, which, I would recommend, I guess. But only if you're really into Gundam, and for anyone who's actually looking to get into Gundam, I would recommend Siege more, or preferably you go get Origin, which is, a retelling of the original Gundam series. So I would actually recommend most people start out with Gundam Origin, that's the best way to put it. And that's my review of Gundam Wing. Hopefully you enjoyed it, hopefully you found it entertaining. And one other thing I guess I should probably point out is that this is out of print. If you want to pick this up, I believe the French Amazon is still releasing copies, and it has its English subtitles and English dub, so there should be no problems with that. Anyway, thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, and bye-bye.